A shy maid accidentally cleaned the wrong CEO's office. Unaware, the millionaire came back early, and the rain was merciless that morning. Bianca Clark, 25, rushed into the tall glass building, soaked to the bone. Her blonde hair clung to her cheeks, her shoes squished with every step, and the borrowed umbrella had flipped inside out long before she reached the lobby. She was covering a cleaning shift for her friend Clara, who had called in sick. First day, new floor, and unfamiliar layout. After changing into her uniform in a nearby staff restroom, still damp and hurried, she quickly tied her hair back, grabbed a mop, and followed the map on her phone. Floor 12, East Wing, Office 1201. The hallway was empty, silent. She found the door slightly ajar. No nameplate, no lights. Just water puddling under her feet and the click of the elevator doors shutting behind her. She stepped inside, muttering, "Better clean this before someone slips." Without knowing it, Bianca had entered the executive suite of Friedrich Rick Steele, CEO of Steele Holdings. As she wiped the floor, a gust of wind from the cracked window knocked over a stack of papers. Files flew. A manila folder opened like a fan across the desk and tumbled to the floor. Bianca gasped and scrambled to collect the scattered documents, shuffling on her knees, hands damp. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching until it was too late. "What the hell are you doing in my office?" The voice sliced the silence like a blade. Bianca froze. She looked up to see a tall man in a dark gray suit, his jaw tense, steel moon eyes narrowed. His coat was still wet from the rain, his hair neatly swept back. The CEO. I didn't know this was your office," she stammered, still clutching papers to her chest. "The door was open. I thought it was empty. I was just cleaning." Rick's eyes darted from her to the scattered documents. "Looks more like you were snooping through confidential files." "No, I swear." The wind knocked them over. She moved to grab her tote bag, but in her flustered panic it tipped over. A few items spilled out. A water bottle, a phone charger, and a rolled-up drawing that unfurled across the floor. It was a child's crayon sketch. A small figure stood under an umbrella, arms wrapped around a woman's waist. Both smiling, rain drawn in soft blue streaks above them. Simple, heartfelt, striking. Rick's expression shifted, his breath caught. He recognized it, not the drawing itself, but the feeling, the memory. A moment from his childhood, the one day his mother picked him up from school in a storm. The same embrace, the same crooked umbrella. He lowered his phone, thumb hovering over the call button for security. Bianca noticed. "Please, don't call anyone. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I didn't even know whose office this was." Rick didn't speak right away. His eyes were still on the drawing. Something in him softened, just barely. A flicker of something old. Pain. Warmth. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Bianca hesitated. "I drew it last night, just a memory, or maybe a dream." Rick studied her face, the faint freckles, the way her cheeks flushed when nervous, and then his eyes caught something else, a small birthmark near her ear. His mother had one in the exact same place. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rain still pattering against the window. Bianca slowly knelt to pick up the rest of the papers. "I'll leave right away. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Rick nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Wait," she looked up. "You forgot this." He held out the drawing, now slightly crinkled but unharmed. She reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his, a brief, electric contact. "Thank you," she whispered. Rick said nothing more, but as she turned to leave, he watched her with a strange intensity. Not suspicion anymore, curiosity, and something else he hadn't felt in years. Recognition. Bianca kept her head down the rest of the day, convinced she was moments away from being escorted out of the building. The encounter in the office had left her shaken, and the memory of the CEO's cold stare still clung to her like the dampness of her clothes. She cleaned in silence, floors, desks, even stairwells. No one noticed her. No one ever did, and that, usually, was a comfort. Today, it felt like a sentence. Across the building, in a high-glass office with a view of the gray city skyline, Rick sat at his desk, the folded drawing resting before him. He had not opened it again. He did not need to. The image was burned into his memory. The child in the rain, the red flower, the long-mailed woman whose face looked hauntingly like his mother's. It was not possible. It should not have been possible. He tapped his pen against the desk and made a decision. "Find the cleaning temp from this morning," he said into the intercom. "Bianca Clark, do not fire her, just keep her on schedule." "Yes, sir," came the quick reply. Rick did not explain further. In the following days, Bianca continued her work. Each evening, when the building emptied out, she moved from floor to floor with her mop, her gloves, her silence. She never saw the CEO again. Or so she thought. Rick watched her once, from a distance, standing at the far end of the hall. She was wiping down the windows, humming softly to herself. Her ponytail swayed with each motion, her uniform a little too big on her small frame. She looked like someone out of place, and yet, for some reason, perfectly at home. That night, as she was leaving, she accidentally left behind a sketchbook tucked into her cleaning cart. Rick found it. He should have returned it unopened. Instead, he flipped it open and was met with page after page of quiet heartbreak. A young boy with sad eyes, a mother with a tired smile, hands reaching but never quite touching. One image in particular made him freeze, a woman with a soft expression and a birthmark on her cheek, holding a child close to her chest. It was the birthmark that struck him hardest. That mark had been on his mother's face, a unique shape just above her cheekbone, faint but unmistakable. And Bianca had drawn it. He stared at the sketch for a long time, the pencil lines shaking his composure far more than any boardroom deal ever had. The next evening, Bianca noticed her sketchbook had been returned, quietly placed in her cart, untouched. Except for a single sticky note on the first page. "Why do your dreams look like my memories, R.S.?" She stared at the note for several seconds, heart pounding. He had seen them, and instead of anger, he had asked a question, a personal one, one that said, "I felt something too." She held the book to her chest, unsure what it all meant. But for the first time, she did not feel invisible, and neither did he. Rick closed the door behind them with a soft click. Bianca stood near the edge of the office, eyes down, her cleaning gloves still on. She looked unsure, like someone who knew she did not belong but had nowhere else to be. "You can take a seat," Rick said, his voice quieter than she'd heard before. Bianca hesitated, then sat slowly on the edge of a leather chair near the window. "I asked you to come back, not because the floor needed cleaning," he began, leaning on the desk, arms crossed. "The drawing you dropped, the one of a child hugging his mother in the rain." She looked up sharply, her face flushed. I didn't mean to leave it," she stammered. Sometimes I sketch what I dream. I don't even know where it comes from. I've been doing that since I was a kid." Rick studied her. And the woman's face, with the birthmark on her left cheek? Bianca frowned slightly, trying to recall. "I just saw her in a dream. She had this gentle face, tired but kind. There was a mark, yeah. I didn't think much of it." Rick opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out an old photo. It was worn at the edges, its colors fading with time. He placed it gently in front of her. She gasped. The woman in the photo, her expression, the sadness in her eyes, the birthmark, was nearly identical to the figure in Bianca's drawing. Bianca looked at him, stunned. "This is your mother?" Rick gave a small nod. "She died when I was 8. I only have one photo left. That one." He paused, his voice low. "You drew her without ever meeting her." "I swear, I didn't know." "I know," he said gently. "I believe you." There was a moment of silence, thick and tender. Bianca spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know why I see things. They just come in dreams, usually after I've been overwhelmed. I draw them to clear my head." Rick leaned back slightly, staring at her. Maybe you're not just clearing your head, maybe you're connecting to something deeper. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. That sounds too big, or just right. They sat like that for several moments, two strangers caught in something neither could quite explain. Rick finally stood, walking to the safe built into the side wall of the office. He tapped the code, opened it, and returned with something carefully wrapped in cloth. He laid it down, unwrapped it, another old photo, creased and faded. It was the same mother standing in a garden, and next to her, a young boy. This was taken 2 months before she died, he said, voice cracking just slightly. I've never shown this to anyone here. Bianca's eyes welled. Why me? I don't know, he admitted. But when I saw your drawing, it was like someone pulled a thread inside my chest. She stared at the photo, then back at her sketchbook resting on the corner of his desk. Slowly, she opened it to the page with the rain scene. She turned it toward him. Maybe it was a message, she said, almost more to herself than to him. From her, from something. Rick reached for the sketch, hesitated, then traced the line of the mother's face with his fingertip. It was a perfect match. He looked at Bianca. You're not just someone who walked into the wrong office, he said. Bianca blinked, overwhelmed. Then who am I? Rick gave a faint smile. Maybe the only person who ever saw what mattered most to me, without being told. Her breath caught in her chest. Neither of them moved. The rain outside had stopped. The city below buzzed quietly in the distance, but here in this room, everything stood still. Bianca finally whispered, I should go. Rick nodded slowly, then almost reluctantly stepped aside to let her pass. As she reached the door, he said, Keep drawing. She paused, looked back. I will, she said. She left the office, her heart pounding, her fingers still trembling, but with something new growing inside her. She did not know what it was, but she knew it was real. The next evening, Rick found Bianca once more, this time in the hushed corridor by the service elevator. She was crouched beside a supply cart, meticulously organizing brushes and cloths, lost in concentration. The overhead lights flickered softly, barely illuminating the muted pastel hues of her uniform. He stepped closer, his footsteps cautious, as if he didn't want to startle something delicate. Do you have a minute? He asked quietly, voice gentle enough to break the silence without startling her. Bianca looked up, startled, her hands freezing mid-mashment. She blinked once, slowly, then nodded. Yes, of course. Her voice was soft, but steady. He gestured toward the rooftop stairs. Together, they walked in silence up the narrow service stairwell, a muted echo of their footsteps following them upward. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving them alone in soft shadows and hushed calm. On the rooftop garden, the sky still bore streaks of pink and lavender from sunset, the city fading below them into twinkling lights. The air was cool and smelled faintly of blooming winter flowers and concrete. Bianca shivered, drawing her sweater tighter around her. Rick stepped to the railing, gazing out at the horizon, then closed his eyes as if centering himself before speaking again. My mother's name was Elise, he began, turning to look at her. She died of heart failure. Suddenly, I was 8. Bianca's hands twisted together in her lap. Her voice caught, softened by sincerity. I'm so sorry. Rick nodded, eyes distant as though replaying an old film. I was supposed to visit her that day, but I was angry, something stupid, something childish. I stayed at a friend's instead. I never said goodbye. Bianca looked down at the rooftop tiles, each geometric pattern now taking on ominous weight. Words formed behind her lips, but she swallowed them instead. Finally, she whispered, I didn't mean to bring any of that back. Rick shook his head, his fingers tracing invisible shapes in the air. You didn't bring it back. You reminded me it was still there. You reminded me I never healed. The pink sky deepened into blue as dusk enveloped them. A quiet moment passed, neither rushing to fill it, as though letting it wrap around them like a blanket. I don't know how it happens, Bianca began softly. Sometimes I wake up and I just see things. Emotions, colors, faces. They crowd my mind until I grab my pencil and draw them out before they vanish. She glanced at him, her eyes wary. I didn't know it was your mother in the drawing. I didn't even know she existed. Rick gave a wry, almost amused chuckle. She was my entire world once, and then, incredibly and painfully, silence. Until you. Bianca's throat tightened, the vulnerability in her chest expanding. That must feel strange. He turned fully toward her, shoulders squared against the wind. A tender smile softened his features. It feels like breathing again after being underwater for years. She shifted slightly, searching his face. Do you think I'm crazy? He paused, his gaze steady and unflinching. No, I think you're rare, maybe even a miracle. Not crazy, someone who carries too much, but doesn't let it break you. Bianca blinked hard, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. I paint what I dream, she said, voice a breath, but sometimes the dreams are heavy, like I'm carrying someone else's sadness. Rick nodded with quiet understanding. Maybe that's what empathy is, carrying pieces of others, holding them as gently as you can. She swallowed. But why did you do all this? Why not just fire me when you saw me in your office? He reached out and placed a steady hand on her shoulder, warmth radiating from his palm. Because you gave me something I barely realized I still needed. A glimpse of the past given new meaning. Bianca stared at his hand resting on her shoulder, gentle, steady, human. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from release. She motioned toward his hand. You don't have to explain it, he smiled softly. Just don't stop, not because of me, because of what you do for others. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. The gray moose city twinkled behind them, indifferent yet alive. It's hard to believe my drawings matter. It matters, Rick said, voice resolute. More than you know. Her lips curved into a fragile smile. You've been nothing but kind to me. I don't even know why. He stepped closer, his presence solid and comforting. Because you reminded me that some things are worth holding on to, even if they hurt. Another silence followed, a shared embrace of words and unspoken truths. Rick gently squeezed her shoulder, grounding her. I know it hurts, but sometimes pain means you're living in the right places. Bianca released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They remained there, shoulder to shoulder on the rooftop, until city lights reflected in the dark water nearby. Two souls, once separated by time and loss, now connecting in the quiet stillness of a rooftop garden, sharing the distance between them with a new possibility. No titles, no roles, just two people who had learned that silence, when shared, could feel more like home than any words ever said. It began as nothing, an overheard sentence, a knowing look, a whisper at the water cooler. Did you see her come out of the executive elevator? She's just a cleaning girl, right? Why is she even on the 20th floor? Come on, she's clearly using something to get close to Rick Steele. Bianca felt it shift. The smiles faded when she entered the room. Conversations halted abruptly. People who used to nod politely now looked away, or worse, looked her up and down with thinly veiled judgment. It stung more than she expected. Not because the words were cruel, but because they chipped away at something fragile she had only just begun to build, her sense of worth. She overheard it clearly one afternoon in the break room. She's not even pretty, a woman sneered. Just blonde and shy, maybe that's his type. Bet she used that sad orphan backstory too. Bianca froze in the hallway, heart pounding. Her hands clenched around the folder she was holding, the edges biting into her skin. That night, she stood in the small supply closet where she sometimes kept her art supplies. She looked down at a sketch she had started, a pair of hands reaching toward the light, and felt the tears spill. The next morning she typed her resignation, a simple email, no dramatic explanations. Thank you for the opportunity, I will not be returning. She dropped her badge on the front desk, gave one last glance toward the building where something had almost begun, and walked out into the rain. Rick noticed her absence by mid-morning. No Bianca in the elevator, no silent shadow cleaning the edges of the gallery space. He waited, assuming maybe she was late. By noon he was pacing. He called her extension, no answer. Called facilities, nothing. Then he called HR. "Bianca Clark?" he said tightly. "Where is she?" The woman on the line sounded cautious. "She submitted her resignation this morning, effective immediately." Rick froze. "Did she say why?" "She didn't," the voice replied. "Just asked that her final check be mailed." The silence in his office was deafening. He stared at the phone, then at the framed drawing on his desk, the child hugging his mother in the rain. Her sketch, his memory. She was gone, and he had done nothing to stop it. Later that afternoon, a company-wide meeting was held in the main conference hall. Quarterly updates, strategy rollouts, polite clapping. Rick was not scheduled to appear, but he did. He entered the room through the side door, his tall frame unmistakable. The room hushed. Rick walked to the center stage, adjusted the mic, and paused. "I know I'm not on the agenda," he began, "but I need to address something. Something personal." The silence sharpened. "There's been talk about a certain woman, Bianca Clark." He scanned the room, his voice steady. "Some of you think she got special treatment, that she must have offered something to earn my attention, that because she cleaned floors and not spreadsheets, she was somehow less." He let that hang, eyes piercing. "You're wrong." He reached into his pocket and held up a folded piece of paper, a sketch, one of Bianca's. "She walked into my office by accident, and somehow she stepped into my life with more honesty and grace than most people I've known." He placed the drawing gently on the podium. "She didn't ruin my morning, she saved my soul." Gasps, murmurs, and then stillness. Rick stepped away from the microphone and walked out. He had made his truth clear. Now he just had to hope it wasn't too late to make it right. The gallery buzzed with preparations. Lights were tested, canvases framed, names etched carefully onto placards. But at the heart of it all stood a quiet figure, Bianca Clark, no longer in a janitor's uniform but in a simple black dress, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. She had returned, not to sweep floors, but to lead something powerful. Rick had found her 2 weeks after the company meeting. She was staying with an elderly aunt 2 towns over, sketching in solitude, working at a local bookstore. He showed up unannounced. "I'm not here to apologize," he had said gently. "I'm here to ask." Bianca stared at him, wary. "I want to fund a project," he continued, "an art exhibit, for people like you, people with wounds, but also with hope." He laid out the vision. Wounds and hope, a community art initiative that would give voice to those often silenced. Children in hospitals, women from shelters, survivors of all kinds, and Bianca. He wanted her to curate it. Her fingers trembled over her sketch pad. "Why me?" she whispered. Rick didn't hesitate. "Because you see people, because you've felt pain and still create beauty." "Because I trust you," she agreed. Not for him, but for the ones who had never been seen. Weeks turned into months. Bianca worked tirelessly, interviewing artists, selecting pieces, organizing workshops. She painted too, quietly, privately. Her art became more than expression, it became connection. The launch of the exhibition drew attention, local press, influencers, community leaders. But to Bianca, what mattered most were the stories on the walls. A crayon drawing by an 8-year-old boy titled "My Mom's Smile After Chemo." A charcoal sketch of a broken swing set by a girl who had once lived on the streets. And then her own centerpiece. A massive canvas. Rain cascading from the heavens. A child clutching his mother under a shared umbrella. Her arms encircling him like a shield, a faint unmistakable birthmark on her cheek. The crowd stilled before it. No one spoke, until someone cried. "Rick!" He stood among the guests, tall and composed, until he wasn't. His shoulders trembled, His hand came up to cover his face. The dam broke. Bianca saw him from across the room. She didn't run to him. She didn't need to. He had allowed the world to see him not as a CEO but as a son. Later that evening, long after the guests had left and the lights dimmed, Rick found her alone in the gallery. "You did it," he said soft. Bianca turned, tired but radiant. "We did." He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "That painting. It wasn't just beautiful. It was my memory." "I know," she replied, "and somehow also mine." Rick reached out, taking her hand, not with urgency but with reverence. "This isn't just art," he said. "It's healing." Bianca nodded, eyes glistening. And for the first time since her return, she smiled. Not out of politeness, but because she knew she was home. The sky above the New England coast rippled in soft hues of rose, amber, and lavender as Bianca stepped onto the quiet, wind-swept beach. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings, and the ocean stretched before them in gentle waves that rolled toward the shore like whispered secrets. A soothing hush settled over them, no need for words, yet everything felt deeply said. Bianca took a slow breath, letting the fresh breeze brush her damp hair back, as if reminding her she was alive, free. Rick fell into step beside her, tall and steady, his long coat brushing the tips of his boots. He stared out at the horizon, but his presence at her side steadied her heart. They walked with measured pace, the waves lapping at their feet. Each step felt purposeful, as if together they were treading toward something neither knew but deeply believed in. She raised her voice just enough to break the silence. "It feels different here," she said softly. "No crowds, no bright lights, just space." He nodded, his gaze never leaving the shifting line of sea and sky. "This place kept me grounded once," he said quietly. "When everything else felt overwhelming, I'd come here, talk to the water, watch how it kept flowing, no matter what storms passed through." Bianca listened, the way she did when painting, attentive but unobtrusive. She watched his profile, the way the sunset haloed him in warm tones. She had seen leaders before, bosses, managers, but had never known one who spoke with such quiet clarity. Rick paused and pointed to a weathered driftwood log lying across the sand. "Sit with me?" he asked. Bianca hesitated, then joined him. The log was cool and rough beneath her palms. She settled beside him, knees drawn close, letting the familiarity of shared silence press into her chest. He shifted, as if preparing to open something between them. Then, after a breath, he reached inside his coat collar and paused. He pulled out a small midnight globe velvet box, his fingers drifting across its surface as though unsure of what it might mean to offer it. I wanted you to have this," he said, voice gentle enough to blend with the surf. "Something for you to carry always." Bianca's breath caught. She looked at the box in his hands, then at his face. His expression was tender, hopeful. She felt her arms tremble as she reached for the box. Inside lay a simple silver bracelet, slender and timeless. Along the inner curve, a delicate wave pattern wound around a single engraved letter, B. Her fingers traced the engraving reverently. The moonlight caught the wave motif, making the silver glow like water under starlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Rick lifted her wrist, guiding the bracelet gently into place. "I wanted you to have something, as quiet but steady as your spirit," he said, a reminder that you were truly seen. Bianca closed her eyes, tears warm on her cheeks. The wind tugged strands of her hair across her face, but she brushed them back without care. In this moment, the world could see everything she felt. No mask, no hiding. Rick leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm. "This is how I've seen you from day one. Not a mistake who wandered into my life, but someone who showed me what truly matters." He didn't reach for her hand, he simply let his presence speak for him, but his thumb unconsciously brushed the soft skin atop her bracelet. Words failed her. Tears rolled freely now, not from sorrow, but from recognition. from being held and honored without explanation. Bianca looked at him with a vulnerability that needed no translation. She saw his heart, wide open, mirroring her own. He stayed still, quiet, offering her all the space to respond as she needed. After what felt like both moments and lifetimes, Bianca lifted her head and offered him a small, radiant smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, relief gentle in his features. "I'm not good with words," he admitted, voice barely above the surf. "But if you'll allow me, I want to keep writing this story with you." Bianca's chest swelled as she nodded. The small gesture held the weight of everything: hope, trust, acceptance. She opened her palms, letting the bracelet shine in the moonlight, felt its lightness on her wrist, and in that soft silver glimmer she knew this wasn't a diamond ring or a grand proposal. It was a promise. To be seen, not admired. To walk together. To build a story written not with words or fanfare, but with gestures of recognition and hearts unwavering. They sat side by side on the driftwood log, waves murmuring at their feet, breathing in unison with the gentle rhythm of the sea. In that shared silence, a new chapter began, quietly, beautifully, and without need for anything more than their presence and the subtle weight of a silver bracelet. A year had passed. Where once there was silence, now there was color. Where there had been shadows, now stood light. Dream Traces, an art and healing center in the heart of Boston, opened its doors to laughter, brushstrokes, and the gentle voices of children who had once felt invisible. Bianca Clark stood at the entrance, the silver bracelet glinting on her wrist as she welcomed a line of eager young artists, their eyes full of wonder. She was no longer the shy janitor who kept her head low and her voice quieter than the hum of the floor buffer. Today, she was Bianca Clark, director, curator, mentor, and soul of the project that gave wounded hearts a voice. Dream Traces was her idea, but it was Rick Steele who brought it to life, funded by the Steele Foundation, embraced by the art world, and praised by the press. But Rick had not built it for recognition. He had built it for her, and for every child like the one in her paintings. Every week, Rick showed up, rolled up sleeves, smudges of paint on his forearms, sitting cross-legged on floors, letting children paint his shoes, asking them what they dreamed about. The bond between him and Bianca was unspoken but undeniable. When he looked at her across the courtyard during afternoon sessions, when he gently adjusted a child's easel or helped clean a spill, it was clear he saw her, every version of her, and she, finally, saw herself. The opening night of the special exhibition brought Boston's elite, families, reporters, and art critics into the softly lit halls of Dream Traces. The show was titled "What We Dream But Cannot Speak." The room was filled with raw, honest creations, colors that bled, lines that trembled, portraits that held back tears. But the centerpiece, the painting everyone stopped for, was Bianca's. A child holding tightly to his mother under a downpour, faces pressed together in quiet strength. Behind them, a silver hand mirror reflecting a sky not above them, but within them. People stood in front of it, motionless. Some cried. Some simply closed their eyes. Bianca stood to the side, watching them, not seeking praise, but understanding. Behind her, Rick approached quietly, as he always did. She was kneeling beside a group of children, telling them how each stroke on the canvas had come from a dream she did not fully understand, until someone helped her see its meaning. Then, with the cameras clicking in the distance, Rick bent down and kissed her softly on the forehead. No flashbulb could capture the warmth in that moment. No caption was needed. The image spread across social media, news sites, and art blogs, not as gossip, not as spectacle, but as a symbol, a quiet declaration that love, real love, does not demand center stage. It simply stands by your side. Days later, Bianca sat across from a journalist during an interview. The room was bright but not blinding. Her hands were calm on the table. She smiled when asked, "If you could say one thing to the world, what would it be?" She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I'm not an artist because of what I draw," she said gently. "I am an artist because someone saw in my dreams something worth loving." The interviewer said nothing. She did not need to. That quote would headline the article. That sentiment would echo far beyond the gallery walls. Because it was never just about art. It was about being seen, and being loved not in spite of your cracks, but because of them. That night, after the guests had gone, Rick found Bianca in the quiet of the studio. She stood in front of the mirror in her painting, her reflection soft and strong. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "This place feels like home," he said. She nodded, "Is." And as they stood there, in the glow of drying paint and fading music, they both knew something simple, sacred, and true. It had started with a mistake, but it ended with a home, not made of bricks or beams, but of dreams, gently traced, and finally, fully believed. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, do not forget, there are countless more like it, waiting to be heard. Stories of quiet strength, of second chances, of love that doesn't need to shout to be real. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and be part of a journey where every tale reminds us we are never truly invisible, and sometimes the most unexpected mistakes lead us home. Hit that subscribe button, like and share if you believe in the power of being seen.